it's absolutely fentanyl. We're seeing it in Xanax and ketamine, and it is killing thousands of people.
Welcome to the Greener Grass podcast from BlueBird Botanicals. I'm your host, Lex Pelger. What's really in your drugs? Is your MDMA full of bath salts? Is there fentanyl in your friend's cocaine? If you wanted to find out, you could send it into a lab and wait 6 weeks. Or you could pick up a reagent test kit like the one sold by the Bunk Police. Adam Auctor talks to me today about the dangers of party drugs laced with cheaper and dirtier alternatives. He's traveled the country and worked in Europe to get out the word on the adulteration of psychoactives. Today we get to learn from his unique perspective. This show is brought to you by BlueBird Botanicals, to spread education about cannabis and other things on the greener side of life. BlueBird CBD oil comes from farms in southern Colorado and is grown using only water, soil, and sunlight. Go to bluebirdbotanicals.com for more info. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with Adam Auctor of Bunk Police. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Before we get into Bunk Police, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got interested in these subjects?
Sure. Yeah. So, I've been interested in substance use since I was, pretty young. I just, I kind of grew up with Irwin, and I was a very sheltered, I was like homeschooled Eagle Scout type kid. So I wasn't doing these substances, but I just found the whole thing very interesting. And went through my college experience, and then towards the end of my degree, I kind of discovered, I just happened upon the fact that people were adulterating different substances, and especially MDMA with cathinones, as many people might know as bath salts. And, I was one of the first people to find that, and I just kind of delved in a lot deeper after that.
How did this project come about?
Well, I was finishing up my degree in marketing, and I was going to a music festival with some friends, and I had noticed that some of the people around me were taking substances whose effect did not match up with what they were supposed to be. So I started looking into testing supplies, and I stumbled upon the police test kits that can be found in the back of a police cruiser. They identify substances that they find when they pull somebody over, or that sort of thing. And I tried to order some of them from a forensic chemical supplier, and it was for police use only, and they actually weren't supposed to ship it to me, but they did anyways. And I went to a music festival with these things and just started testing everything that I could find, and uncovered the synthetic cathinone problem. This was in 2011.
And can you talk a little bit about what synthetic cathinones are and why that was a problem for them to be popping up so much?
Sure, yeah. So that's colloquially known as bath salts, or plant food they were being marketed as at the time. And they're just a completely different substance from MDMA, which is what they were being used to adulterate. And they come with their own set of risks, including like psychotic episodes and that sort of thing. And it was all very new at the time, and there were a lot of media stories about the bath salt epidemic, and so we just kind of took it upon ourselves to try and figure out what was happening.
And how was it received as you started to realize how big this problem was, as you started to tell people and realize the extent of it?
It was very well received. Very well received. Yeah. People, at these events that I was going to, I ended up going to about 20 of them over the course of the first summer, just, doing testing for free. And, we'd have lines of, as many as 20, 30, even 40 people just waiting to test their substance because, they were concerned, but, not only for their own safety, but also that pretty much everybody was getting ripped off. It was received very well.
And what about the organizers? Because today it's still a huge sticking point on-site drug testing. Did you have any interactions with anyone doing the organizing?
That first year, I didn't have any interactions with organizers. They, were pretty much oblivious to what we were doing. It was only after the media started covering us pretty heavily in 2012 and 2013, and especially after we released our documentary, What's in My Baggie, that they really started taking notice of us and more or less chasing us around and throwing us out of events.
And can you tell more about the making of what's in my baggie? And for everyone, it's an excellent piece of work out there about drug testing in this project.
Sure, yeah. So, it was a group of people that approached me. They had heard about the adulteration issue, and they had the ability to, take some time off of their jobs. One of them was a film producer, and they just kind of more or less followed me around all summer as we went into people's campsites and tested their substances, and showed them what the contents were. And it was pretty interesting because a lot of these people were on the substances while we were testing them, so they'd be finding out that they were taking something completely different after they'd taken it.
Ooh, how do you handle that kind of situation?
Oh, I mean, people would be, shocked, and we would just kind of, work them through the problem and be like, well, this is what you can do to prevent it in the future, and this is the group of chemicals that we're seeing, and here's how you can help, and that sort of thing.
And so when you're talking about this, people don't know about it at all. How do you talk about this on-site drug testing and the problems that you're helping to alleviate?
Right. Well, I mean, it's harm reduction. We're just trying to reduce the risk of an inherently dangerous act, which is taking illegal substances, and we believe that people will do it no matter what. So they might as well be as safe about it as possible.
What are the most worrisome adulterants that you see out there?
Well, right now it's absolutely fentanyl. We're seeing it in substances across the board. We were really concerned about it showing up in cocaine samples this year at events, and we did see that at quite a few different events throughout the U.S. Of course, it's a really big problem in heroin. That's been going on for a year or two now. We're also finding it in Xanax and ketamine, and it is killing thousands of people. So we're very concerned about that.
And fentanyl is being the really strong opioid. Why do you think that this is the one being used? Is it because it's cheaper to manufacture and just slip in to the stream?
Yeah, you definitely hit it. It's incredibly cheap to manufacture. It's easy to manufacture, and it has some pretty heavy effects for the amount that you have to acquire and mix into these substances.
Can you walk me through the tests that are available from Bunk Police?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the fentanyl kits. We call them fent kits, and it's actually it's a strip that has some antibodies on it. And so what you do is you take a little bit of your sample and you dip this strip into the sample, and it'll kind of wick up the strip. And depending on how many lines show up, it will tell you if there's fentanyl or not. And it's very very sensitive down to the nanogram even. And beyond that, we have 8 different substance test kits that can pick up pretty much everything, except for substances like GHB and PCP. We're able to hit hundreds of different substances, and we usually recommend that people use a series of these so they can check for different adulterants and that sort of thing. And kind of in addition to these reagent kits, as what we call them, is something called our separation test kit, and that's based on this lab practice called thin layer chromatography. And I know that sounds complex, but really what it allows you to do is take a mixed substance and separate out into different components, and then test those components individually and identify them.
How many of these substances that you're testing aren't pure and need to be separated before we even get started?
Oh well, I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that question because it depends a lot on the demographic, where we are, who we're dealing with, even what sort of music they're listening to, and that sort of thing can really play into what sort of substances are showing up. But I think it's pretty safe to say that well over 50% of drugs are cut with something. And as far as separating them out, we recommend that people do that every time.
Just a quick aside on that. Which music scenes are most associated with certain drugs?
Well, the EDM scene is very heavily associated with MDMA. You also have your psychedelic communities that are more associated with LSD and mescaline and mushrooms and that sort of thing, DMT. And then you have events like, say Coachella out in California, which, we see a lot of cocaine out there. It varies a lot.
Which kits are your best selling of the reagent kits you have? Which ones seem to be most useful to people out there?
Oh, the Marquee kit is definitely our best seller by a pretty large margin, and that's actually the original kit that I was using to pick up on the bath salts or synthetic cathinone issue in MDMA, and that's still primarily what it's used for. It can also pick up methamphetamine, other novel amphetamines, and it's a great test for adulterants and cocaine. So cocaine itself won't react on these kits, which is actually really valuable because then you can see all the other cutting agents reacting, such as meth or cathinones and all these other ones that not very many people have heard of.
And how would someone use the Marquee kit just to have a run through?
Sure, yeah, you would just take a very small amount of your substance, just a few milligrams, and you add a little bit of the liquid reagent to it. So it's just take your powder and add the liquid, and it's going to change colors over the course of 60 seconds. And you just match that color change up to our charts. And it'll tell you if it matches the expected reaction, the expected substance, or if it's different. And then we have pages upon pages of adulterants that you can go through and find out exactly what it is if it didn't match.
And I think it's great that you're selling these kits for 20 or 25 bucks and that's 100 different tests that people can have for their substances. I mean, it's impressive how you managed to keep the price so low. How'd you pull this off?
Well, the reagents themselves are not particularly expensive to manufacture. So we make as much as we can, and then put as much as we think people would need in like the most extreme circumstances in a bottle, so that they always just have more than they need. The expensive part is the research that goes into it, but we try and subsidize that ourselves and keep the prices as low as we can.
And how do you handle research on things like this and get these substances to test and then make sure that your protocols are appropriate?
Right. Well, I mean, that process involves acquiring these substances, which is something that we do in Europe mostly. It's not something that is even close to legal here in the U.S., and it's not particularly legal what we were doing over in Europe either. But most of what we do is we acquire them either through the dark web or through other chemists that can be found on forums online and dark web forums and that sort of thing. And we take these substances and then we GCMS and HPLC test them, which is a laboratory process. It gives you a percentage, a very precise percentage, down to the hundredths or thousands of a percent even. And once we have what we consider to be a pure sample, like analytical grade, we will take this sample and then use the test kits, all 8 of them, on the samples, and film the reactions. And we actually have these reactions available on our YouTube page, and there are 1,500 of them now in total. You can also use our Bunk Leaks Android app to go through and sort them. So if you're looking for MDMA adulterants, it'll go through and it'll sort by that and tell you exactly what could be potentially an MDMA and show you all the videos and put all that in front of you in a really easy to access way.
That's great. That's really nerd chemistry at its highest level.
Oh, we try and get as nerdy as possible with it. Yeah.
And what was it like to be acquiring all of these different compounds?
For the most part, it was easier than you might imagine. Just making the purchases and having them delivered and that sort of thing. But we did have to, in many cases, order a dozen or more different samples of the same substance because they weren't anywhere close to pure. They would have adulterants in them or precursors or any number of things. So in some circumstances, we would have to use the lab that we have out in Barcelona to purify them. And then in even more extreme circumstances where we absolutely couldn't find a sample of some of these really weird ones like PMA, paramethoxyamphetamine, or paramethoxymethamphetamine, we actually did end up hiring clandestine chemists in Eastern Europe to synthesize them for us. So it was a pretty intensive 4 year plus experience that required us ordering several thousand different samples, more or less several thousand drug deals is what it came down to.
All in the name of science and harm
Yes, sir.
reduction.
Absolutely.
Speaking of your lab in Barcelona, according to your website, soon people will be allowed to use that as well to test their samples at a super high level professional lab.
Right. Yeah. This lab is one that we work with the Spanish government in. So it's a government organization called Energy Control out there that is actually funded by the Spanish government, and they use this laboratory for all kinds of different testing beyond harm reduction. They use it for testing for steroids and like supplements and that sort of thing as well. So yeah, we're hoping to if we can find the testicular fortitude to do it, to open it up to actual send in samples from the U.S. But it's a very legally difficult issue, and we've been working on it for a couple years now. And I think we're about ready to pull the trigger.
That's great. That's such a great service for the community. And so, what's it been like trying to stay on the legal side, and how do you find the atmosphere in Europe versus the United States for doing your work?
Sure. Well, I mean, staying on completely legal with this is pretty much impossible. We've done our best, and we really don't play with the laws too much here in the U.S. because the consequences are pretty dire here. But over in Europe, there's a much better understanding of this process and the fact that harm reduction is necessary. So even if we were caught, which thankfully has not happened yet, we feel that the courts over there would be very forgiving and probably even dismiss the case after we explain what we do. But like I said, none of this is possible in the U.S.
If you were put in charge of the laws around the U.S. in regards to this, how would you want to see them set up for the maximum amount of harm reduction?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, we need to completely legalize test kits. They are legal in 14 states right now. It was 13 last year, and then Maryland just snapped its fingers and legalized them. And the reason why they did this is because state-level governments and government entities are ordering fentanyl kits actually from us in quite a few different circumstances and distributing them for free. So in these 36 states where it's not legal or it's legally ambiguous, they're actually breaking their own laws, which I think is just absurd. So first thing we need to do is fix these antiquated laws that have been around since, in some cases, the 70s and 80s. And the second thing that we need to do is completely repeal something called the RAVE Act, the Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy Act of 2002. And what this is it's a very ambiguously worded piece of legislation that makes events think that they could be charged with different crimes for allowing harm reduction organizations to operate on their grounds or during their event. And when it comes down to it, this is just not even close to the case. In fact, we just received a message from the Justice Department directly stating that the RAVE Act has no bearing on harm reduction at festivals or warehouse parties or anything like that. It was meant for organized drug dealing at these events. It's worded in such a way that you could even, in some cases, consider giving away free water or allowing the sale of glow toys or having a down-tempo chill-out area as a violation. And it's very poorly written, and it needs to be revised or hopefully just completely obliterated. Because when it comes down to it, it hasn't even been applied except for one time, about 10 years ago. And that was somebody that was allowing the sale of certain illegal substances on their grounds and disallowing the sale of others. So that person had their grounds confiscated by the federal government.
And I didn't realize that you had a decision like that from the Justice Department saying this really doesn't apply to you.
Right. Well, you're actually probably the first time that we've publicized this. We're about ready to start presenting this to all of these different event promotion companies, and more or less telling them, hey, there's no reason that you should be disallowing harm reduction. These laws don't apply. And when it comes down to it, the state governments are breaking the paraphernalia laws. So between those two things, there's absolutely no reason that you should disallow our presence.
That would be really powerful, because it seems like so much of the chilling effect of the Rave Act isn't that they're enforcing it, it's that the lawyers and the insurance companies for these events are scared it's going to be enforced, and they're the ones who are really putting the screws on these organizers, who some of them want to be doing the best they can in harm reduction, I think.
I think you're absolutely correct. Yeah. There is also the perception of these events, even though some of these events are just speakers and bright lights in a field, where, I mean, obviously people are taking substances in one way or the other. They like to pretend like drug use is not a problem there, but they just really need to state the reality of their situation, because these events are not going away, and start to deal with it on a real basis.
And so, what's the feeling like between a festival in Europe where you might have on site drug testing, like the Boom Festival, I believe, has
Mhm.
that, versus the places you go to in the United States where dealers know they can be getting away with anything unless someone has a kit like yours?
I mean, it's a completely different world. These festivals, and there are some here in North America. There are several up in Canada that allow like open air harm reduction with more or less a laboratory that they bring out. The main one is Shambhala up in BC, and they'll have just scrolling results on a giant projector that shows you a picture of the substance and the result right next to it. And that allows them to just sweep through and clean up the whole market. And you're right, like the dealers there know that they cannot get away with that sort of thing, and that if they do sell something that's adulterated, then people will be coming, I mean, quite frankly, to look for them afterwards. You know, so yeah, it's a completely different circumstance.
And one thing your organization does that seems very cool is your Bunk Bot, and the Bunk Bot's events. So people can be at a certain festival and text your bot and then get alerts about bad drugs going around at that event.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. You just text bunk the word bunk to 555-888. Sign up for the event, and you'll have notifications come in, not only about substance issues, but also where to find a test kit on the event's grounds. As sometimes we have to sneak around and distribute them tent to tent and that sort of thing. It's a lot better if we can have people meet up with us. And then, yes, you can just text a picture of the substance and a description of your test to BunkBot. And, first of all, we'll put it on our subreddit and Instagram immediately. And then if it's something that is dangerous enough, because we don't really want to, create a whole lot of fear, because if we were reporting every substance that came in that was adulterated, it'd be a nonstop, stream of text messages coming in. But if it is dangerous enough, for instance, fentanyl, then we will alert everybody on the grounds. And that actually came in really handy at several events this year where we found fentanyl in cocaine specifically.
What have been some of the notable trends you've seen through the drugs at these festivals the last few years?
Sure. Well, the second down from fentanyl, the most concerning for me would be the NBOME chemicals that are being used to adulterate or replace LSD or acid. And these substances are different in a lot of ways. It's a completely different class of chemicals, and they are potentially fatal. We saw an overdose a few years ago in New Orleans where somebody took some and died. And what happens is People will improperly mix it, and they'll miss a decimal point when they're weighing it out or they're titrating it or whatever to put it on a blotter. And people end up with 10 doses instead of one. And then you also have your hardcore users that will take 10 doses themselves and end up having a really bad problem. And it's not just the deaths that we should be tracking here. It's the psychological issues that people have afterwards. Sometimes it's long lasting. It could be a lifetime of of psychological issues, schizophrenia, for instance, because of these substances taken in large amounts. Other than NBOMEs, we've definitely had a really big problem with the synthetic cathinones, the bath salts, and also fluorinated amphetamines are a problem. There's a laundry list of different ketamine analogs that people are cutting ketamine with. The list goes on.
And on the psychedelics specifically, how much do you see of people having psychotic breaks where they might never come back, or it's going to be a long time until they kind of get their life back?
Well, my perspective is kind of skewed because these people will come to us for help. Because a lot of times they don't necessarily trust the medical services or the police that are there. So I see a lot of it, but how often it's happening, per 1,000 people that take a psychedelic or something like that, I don't think anybody is keeping track of that information right now, unfortunately.
How have the police interactions been for you these last years when the ones patrolling the grounds realize what you're up to?
Overwhelmingly positive. They never have an issue with what we're doing, because they see the other side of it. They would prefer that if somebody's going to take a substance, that they would test it beforehand and not end up running naked through the streets, which actually did happen at Lost Lands this year, or doing something else out of their character, where the police have to deal with it. They would prefer that people, be as safe as possible. So we've never had a problem with the police in any interaction, and I've been pulled over with these things over the course of the last 8 years, probably a couple dozen times. The police are out in force on the way into and out on the way out of these events, so they'll just pull you over for anything. But then when they find out what we're doing, and what these kits are for, they usually search us pretty thoroughly for actual drugs. But beyond that, they haven't had an issue. It's the event promoters that are the problem.
That's great. That's really hopeful to hear that. And one last question before I let you get back to your work. What's most exciting for your organization coming up as you look into the future?
Right. Well, we're really excited about the Bunk system, and we're actually in the middle of creating an API and an Android app for that, and we're going to be expanding it beyond just festivals. So you'll be able to go into, either the website, which you can access through your iPhone, or through our Android app, and you'll be able to go to a map and see exactly where these adulterant submissions are coming from on the map. So let's say you're in, I don't know, the south side of Houston. Put in your zip code, it'll zoom in, and it'll show you exactly what's come in and where it's come in within that zip code. So we're really excited about that. We're also excited about a few new emerging technologies that are coming through right now. One is it's called microfluidics, and what that is it's more or less our reagents, but powderized in a way, and then placed on a card. And in doing this, what you can do is you can put several of them, up to 12, on one card. So what you do is you take a little bit of your substance, you put it in some water, and then you set this card in, and it wicks up the card, and they all react at the same time. There's even the possibility that we could have, and this is already being developed, an app that will read it for you. It'll take a picture and then upload it to the database and figure out what the card is telling you. Beyond that, we also have more of the antibody technology that we're currently using in our fentanyl strips emerging. So we're trying to develop right now strips that will be able to detect and maybe even quantify, tell how much of a substance is in you're an adulterant is in your substance, down to the picogram, which is like a billionth of a gram. And yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of cool stuff happening right now. We're really excited for the future.
Great. Thank you so much for your work. We're going to put links to your site and the YouTube videos and the app on the episode notes so everybody can find them. And just wanted to say thank you so much for your work and for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Greener Grass is a BlueBird Botanicals podcast. Their CBD oil supports a healthy body and a strong endocannabinoid system. They've got friendly customer service who can answer any of your questions, and the number is right there at the top of their webpage. But, per the FDA, they won't be able to make any medical claims for these nutritional supplements. That's also the reason you'll hear little about CBD on this show. There's no need for us to add more evidence about CBD when a simple Google search will give you more than you can read in a month of Sundays. So this show covers the cannabis world and more with editorial freedom from BlueBird Botanicals. Thanks for joining the Greener Grass podcast. As always, our audio alchemist is Matt Payne. The Gypsy Jazz theme music comes from Brett Van Donsel. Our beautiful bird sounds are courtesy of Lang Elliott. And I'm your host, Lex Pelger, wishing you a bright green day.